My guest this week is a civil rights attorney, legal expert, and you may have seen us on Dr. Drew's couch together. Areva Martin, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. From sitting next to each other to sitting across from each other.
Yeah, it seems that we're going to be adversaries because we're usually on a couch right next to each other. We get some leg touch on Dr.
And
Drew's couch.
that helps with some of the crazies that come on that show and really make it difficult for people, I think, like you and I, who have really intelligent and smart things to say.
Yeah, wow, we're building each other up just as we start here. But that's exactly why I wanted to have you on the show, because we've been on Dr. Drew a couple times together, and I always find, you're extremely passionate and you know your stuff. And I find there's so many people in television, especially in cable news and on the cable channels, that are just yelling and screaming about stuff, but aren't really experts in anything.
Yeah, I can tell you, and not to brag about my background, but when you think of an expert, you really want the person to have some credentials that really make them an expert. And I can't tell you how many times on these shows I've sat next to someone, I'm having a conversation, I want to go, you know what, I'm sorry, it's fifth grade.
Yeah.
It just drives me crazy. But yes, there's been this proliferation of quote unquote experts because there's so many shows, and it seems like if you are willing to say something so outrageous and to say it very loudly, you can get booked on a show.
Yeah.
And that's what we see pretty routinely on a lot of these shows.
Yeah, and that is, again, that's why I love working with you, because not only do you know your shit, but you get right to it.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm sitting next to you and I'm thinking, man, if I just had that kind of just incisive way of going at it. So we're going to get into some pretty deep issues today.
Well, I've been working on TV for a while, and I've had to perfect the soundbite, because oftentimes you got 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And I tell you, I start checking the news at 5. I read 7, 8 newspapers throughout the day, and I'll get a call, and it's some complex issue that I've got to go on and talk to millions of viewers to make them understand sometimes very technical legal stuff. And the reality is what's happening in a courtroom in a difficult case, say a murder trial, doesn't really play well when you're trying to reduce it to a 30-second soundbite. So you got to get kind of skilled at how to bring that very complex information to really digestible television viewers.
Yeah, and that's exactly why I like doing the long-form interview, because now we have an hour, or maybe a little bit more even, to really get into some stuff, really exchange some ideas.
So important, because some of these topics are so big, you could literally spend all day talking about, but yet you've got to reduce it to a soundbite. So I love long-form conversations.
All right, then we're in the right spot. But before we get to the issues, I want to do a little bit on your history. So you're from St. Louis originally, right?
St. Louis, right next to Ferguson, Missouri.
Yeah.
So when we were all eyes on Ferguson with the Mike Brown shooting, it was really personal for me, because not only did I grow up in that community, I knew so many of the people that were involved on the front lines during the protests. So when that happened, when that explosion in that community occurred, really personally for me. So yes, from St. Louis, then went to college in Chicago, University of Chicago, love Chicago, glad I'm not there this weekend though, given the blizzard that's been just ravishing the country.
Yeah, you moved the right direction.
I moved it right to the sunshine.
Exactly.
To the sunshine. And then went on to Harvard. So I lived in Cambridge. Unfortunately, the Patriots aren't going to the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
but that's another story.
Was a rough ending for them yesterday.
Story. And my husband's like, "How can you be a Patriot fan?" I'm like, "Well, I was there, kind of like the Patriots." But anyhow, so I went to Harvard. Then I actually worked in a corporate law firm. I worked on Wall Street. And I was in this major corporate law firm representing big Fortune 500 companies and doing a lot of corporate law. And I just got tired. It didn't fit with my background, didn't fit with who I had grown up to be and the people that had influenced me. So I left. I left this really, 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 really good job.
Yeah. Are you saying the corporate lawyers make a lot of money? Is that what you're telling me?
I'm saying I left a good job with a lot of money and a lot of perks, and office like on the 40th floor, big. It was amazing.
Yeah.
So imagine me calling St. Louis and the family that's like just over the moon with happiness, that first generation college graduate, first generation Harvard lawyer, big corporate law firm, and now I'm leaving to go work with one other lawyer in this tiny little office on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Give up this huge salary. It didn't go over too well, I could just tell you.
You must have felt incredible pressure because you had sort of accomplished a lot, not that advanced of an age,
Yeah.
and then you say, all right, I'm going to step away from that.
walk away
But
from
isn't that sort of what it's all about, really? What life is all about in a way.
I think it is, and I think folks who find the most happiness in their careers is because they've taken a risk and they really follow their instincts. They follow their intuition. They don't do what's on the kind of the path that's been laid out for them. And if you go to Harvard and you're in the top of your class, your path is supposed to be either you become a Supreme Court clerk,
Right.
and you go on to be a judge, or you go and you run a corporate law firm. You start off as an associate, you become a partner, and you make a ton of money. And that's a great life, and I have lots of friends that do that, so I'm
Sure.
not saying there's anything wrong with
They
that
throw
life.
good parties.
They have great lifestyles. But it just wasn't who I was at my core. I wanted to have more control over who I represented. I wanted to represent little people. I wanted to be involved in issues that really mattered to me, and I just wanted something different for my career. So I had no husband, had no mortgage, and no kids. So you can walk away from a big job like that when you don't have all of those responsibilities.
Yeah, and now you have a husband.
Oh my God.
You have a law
Big
firm that you
mortgage,
run with your husband,
3
correct?
kids, yes.
And you have 3 kids and all of this stuff. So you're doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of stuff, but I'm happy about it. And about 7 years ago, I decided I wanted to step away from my courtroom practice. I was a trial lawyer, and I wanted to have a greater impact. And I had this amazing case, amazing because I was representing these great families. Horrible thing had happened to them. Their kids had been abused in the classroom. Some nonverbal autistic kids abused in the classroom by this just criminal teacher, really. And they called me from Las Vegas and asked me to come and represent them, and I did that. And Dr. Phil was very interested in their story and invited my clients and then me, as a result of representing them, onto his show. And I got there. I loved having an opportunity to raise awareness about an issue I cared about and break down, what had happened legally and why this teacher was being prosecuted. And that began my TV career, and I've been working in TV ever since that one appearance on Dr. Phil.
Yeah, and even that, we're going to get to this a little later, but even having a case involving autism, you've written a book about autism, your son has autism.
Yes.
I don't like saying is autistic because
it
seems very defining versus
Yes.
has autism. It's just a piece of who he is. So that right there was a nice way to start your adventure, sort of, because it was something that was very important to you.
Yeah, and you're right. I did write a book because I was frustrated. I didn't like what was out there. It was too hard to figure out how do you get the best education, how do you get the best health care. And I said, this is crazy. I'm a Harvard-trained lawyer, and I'm having such a difficult time. What about the mom who has 4 or 5 kids at home, maybe working 2 jobs, and doesn't have the time to sit on the internet all day like I did and search for this information? So I wrote a book called The Everyday Advocate, Standing Up for Your Child with Autism and Other Special Needs, to really bring a lot of the information that I had learned as a parent and as an advocate and as a lawyer into one place that a parent, a professional could go and get the help that they needed for their child or grandchild or whatever. So really just tried to make that journey a little easier for parents.
Okay, all right, well, we're going to dive a little deeper into that in a bit, but let's knock out some issues.
Okay.
So you already brought up the first thing that I want to discuss with you, which is Black Lives Matter.
Okay.
So, as you said, you're from St. Louis, right next to
Yes.
Ferguson.
Yes.
You know this area.
Yes.
A couple weeks ago, I had Larry Elder on, who is a
No.
black, the eye roll already. Was that side eye or eye roll? It was a
Well,
little.
I've been on his radio show. We've debated these issues a lot. I don't understand Larry, to be honest with you. Bright guy, lawyer,
Yep.
turned talk show host, radio talk show host. But his views are the most extreme views. I can't even imagine where he got them from. But
So,
he does.
so I don't want to make this about him. It's
absolutely.
not necessary. But the reason I mention it is because why I like doing the show is I want to talk to people that believe one thing and somebody that believes something else. So that's a great place for us to start, because basically his take, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but to
Right.
paraphrase him, was he felt that there really is no more systemic racism in the United States, and that really the struggle for the black community is because of the breakdown of the family. Okay. So if you want to address that a little bit, and then we can dive right into really the nuts and
that's
bolts of
just
the Black
absolutely
Lives
stupid. I can't really. I could be more articulate about it, but I'm just going to say that's
I
just
got you.
stupid. To say there's no longer systemic racism just ignores so much data, so many statistics, so many reports. It ignores the facts. It ignores the reality. And conservatives like Larry like to deflect from those issues because if they can blame it on the family, if they can blame it on the victims, then they don't have to accept any responsibility. But the reality is the criminal justice system, let's just start there. Disproportionate number of African Americans and Latinos, but particularly blacks, who are incarcerated, who have longer sentences, who are treated differently, everything from driving while black, so who are racially profiled even when they drive their cars. And we've seen so many examples of this from high profile people like Chris Rock, James Blake, the tennis player, who all have had some negative experience. The president, Eric Holder, when he was Attorney General, talked about him and his brother being stopped in Washington. So
didn't Danny Glover, something happen with Danny Glover? He couldn't get a cab or something?
I don't think we could identify a black man. I'm serious, whether they're high profile celebrity, professional, or just the guy on the street that hasn't had some negative experience with the police simply because of their race. So when folks like Larry talk about, we're post-racial society, their facts are off. They're just wrong.
So what would you say about the family part, though? Because it seems to me that, as I say on the show all the time, two things can be true at once. So everything that you've said there fully makes sense to me, but also that the breakdown of the family in general, black, white, Asian, green, is a problem that we have.
Well, I don't know what he means when he says the breakdown of the family. I think families have changed. So let's talk about two gay individuals who are now parents because they can get married, they can adopt a kid.
Right. So, conservatives don't go too deep on that.
Well, okay, but the reality is the family today isn't the family of the 1950s. So when they say the breakdown of the family, what family are they talking about? Single moms are as common as two-family households. And are we to say that that's a better family structure? So I'm not sure if even I buy into that assertion that there's been some breakdown. I will agree there's been an evolution and families look very different today. Interracial families couldn't exist 40, 50 years ago. Is that the breakdown of the family? Because now you and I could be married and have kids?
Yeah.
Is that no longer?
You're married, I'm gay. It's
well, okay.
Well, you know what? That could be the new thing.
Okay. But you and I could decide to have a child together, right?
Sure.
Even though we're not married. In vitro. I mean, there's so many ways that families are created. So when they say the breakdown, what are they talking about? So I don't buy into that.
Yeah. All right. Good. That's
why
I had you here. All right. So let's dive really into Black Lives Matter as a movement. What do you make of the general movement itself? Do you feel that it's hitting the right tone?
I'm going to say this, and I'm going to get just slaughtered on social media.
The Twitter people are ready.
Oh my God! Somehow I've become like the spokesperson for Black Lives Matter, even though, they haven't enlisted me, they haven't called me on the phone and asked me to do it. But I find myself trying to give some context. I think what Black Lives Matter has done has been nothing short of brilliant. The issue of race and race politics in this country are very complex. And all hands on deck. So I play a role as a civil rights attorney that represents families who have been the victims of any kind of police violence, or they've had their rights violated, their constitutional rights. So I step in as a lawyer and I represent those people. But then I have this platform. I get to talk on television every week about these high-profile cases, so I get to lend my voice to that. Then there are these people who go out and they march and they protest. And look, as a result of that, so folks in the courtroom, folks using their platform on television, folks like Al Sharpton using his voice, and then these protesters. So now the issue of police profiling, police shootings of African Americans, it's been elevated to this national level. Black Lives Matter have had audiences with Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders. It's come up in the presidential debate. And I think we've got to give those protesters some credit for that, because but for their activism, this issue would not have become a part of the national dialogue that we're having about how do we make communities safer.
Yeah, what did you make of the instance when the two protesters went up to Bernie's podium and basically grabbed the mic from him and
Yeah.
he sort of let them do it. Because a lot of people felt that that was like, I talk about identity politics a lot, and that my problem with identity politics is I find everyone has to figure out who's the most aggrieved. So Bernie is an ally, obviously,
Right.
of the Black Lives Matter movement. He's an ally of the other always. But if everyone is always looking out just for themselves, then you have the right in your mind to grab the mic away from him, who, even though he's as left as it's going to get in politics in America.
Now, to say that I support what Black Lives Matter has done in terms of elevating this conversation to a national level doesn't mean I agree with everything that they do.
Sure.
Would I like for them to approach Bernie differently? Yeah. Did I feel good about watching him try to figure out, what do I do? Do I call security? Do I have them escorted away? And then kind of what's unfair about that?
Yeah.
He didn't have Secret Service protection. The reality is they wouldn't have even gotten near that microphone or stage had that been Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or any of the other candidates that
I don't think Trump has Secret Service, but he has plenty of security guards.
He has plenty of security. So the reality is Bernie, in allowing himself to be open, kind of left himself open to these hyper protesters. So I didn't like that.
Yeah.
Bottom line, I didn't like that, but it doesn't, to me, take away from the overall efforts that they've had and the successes that they've had. But I do think that we have to get comfortable with this concept of disruption. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think is so upsetting to a lot of people, even African Americans, even traditional African American civil rights leaders. They want Black Lives Matter to fit into this box.
Yeah.
They want them to follow the mode of the 1950s and 1960s protesters. And they're like, hell no. That's not who we are. We're not looking for Martin Luther King to come and save us and to lead us. This is a movement of the people, from the people, and it's being done totally different. So they're not looking to organize in a way that John Lewis and a lot of those civil rights leaders did. And I think that's a little unsettling for people. They don't get it.
Yeah, so that's an interesting sort of generational struggle.
It's generational.
Because obviously John Lewis and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and many other people did things at different levels,
Yes.
some on the ground, some via speaking and all that. And I find that this movement hasn't quite figured out what it is yet. But I think your point is that that's part of part of the magic.
That's the part of this new paradigm that literally you can go on Twitter and organize 1,000 people to show up at a rally. And sometimes at that rally, and my daughter has been, so there was a big rally last year after Thanksgiving in Los Angeles, and she says, Mom, some people had this sign, some people had that sign. There was really no organization. I'm not even sure if people knew why they were there, but it caught fire on Facebook, it caught fire on Twitter, and thousands of people showed up.
Yeah.
And I says, well, you have to get used to that. That's a part of the unorganized nature of it is what makes it special and what makes it unique. And yes, some people were there for gay rights. Some people were there for human rights. Some people were there for sex trafficking. Some people were there for police brutality.
Yeah.
I said, but they were all people who were, at the end of the day, just trying to make their lives, their communities, the people they care about, have a better quality of life. So for that, I have to applaud.
So interestingly, there could be this could be the genesis of something sort of much bigger, because when you take all those people, and again, this is where my thing with identity politics is sort of interesting, because everyone's got their issue.
Yes.
And yet they're coming together, so that's good in itself.
Yes.
But I'm afraid that it allows for a lot of issues to then just jump on top of each other when some of these things aren't necessarily connected.
But what's the alternative? And that's what I say to people. Okay, if you don't like how Black Lives Matter has addressed this police brutality issue, which, by the way, you have to give them some credit for all of the legislation that's happening at the federal level and state by state, requiring body cams. California just passed a law now that says a special prosecutor has to be appointed if there is a police shooting. So we have seen the fruits of their labor.
Sure.
And I say to people, give me an alternative. What in your worldview, or if you could, wave a magic wand, how would it look?
Yeah. I don't think you're asking me specifically. No, I'm with you. I find philosophically, there's something to me that seems a little dangerous of everyone sort of jumping on these social justice things. But I do hear you.
Yeah, I don't see anyone else. And the Black Lives Matter protesters, you talk about generation,
Yeah.
they said, Al Sharpton and some of these other civil rights movements leaders, what they do is fine.
Yeah.
But they're more, they really are about grassroots. They're about local people, indigenous leadership, so people in their own communities standing up and demanding that they get a voice at the table when decisions are being made, like who's going to be the police chief, who's going to be the district attorney. Now, what I would say is what I hope to see, and I was disappointed in the midterm elections last time, how do we translate all of this social activism into electoral politics? How do we get those thousands of people that showed up for a rally, how do we get them to vote
Right,
in
and
the
I know
2016 election and beyond?
Yeah, and you talk a lot about local politics. So I can, backing up for a sec, I can give you an example where I think it's a bit of a problem. So for example, what we're seeing on college campuses right now with free speech. Now I get that the thrust of what they're doing, they're standing up for social justice and they want equality. We're not just talking about the black community, the gay community, whoever it is. Right. So I understand the idea there. But then when you see the instances like at Yale where they're shouting down this professor and that they're demanding professors be fired, it seems to me that we've created a situation here where the students are now dictating the policy, which seems a little backwards. And I know that there's a lot of people in academia that are really afraid of where this is headed.
But they're 18, they're 19, and think about what should you be doing at college? I think what those students are doing is...
Well, you should be exchanging ideas, but not demanding that professors be fired.
Well, why not? If the professors are racist and the professors are not sensitive to the issue of inclusion and diversity, why not demand that they be fired?
Did you feel that professor at Yale, he was the dean of that college, and his wife had written the letter about the Halloween costumes? I mean, to me, it was just, if they don't want to...
Okay, here's the problem for me. In any transition, anytime you're trying to transform an organization that has had systemic racial inequality and injustices for decades, is somebody going to be sacrificed that perhaps really wasn't the person? Are they going to be scapegoated? Probably, yeah. But why is a university like University of Missouri, that all predominantly black football team, if they hadn't stood up and stood with the guy, Jonathan Butler, who went on the hunger strike, if they hadn't stood up with those students, I doubt if Jonathan would still be on that hunger strike or be dead by now. I doubt if that university
Right, so in that case, nobody
responded.
Right.
So, but why is a public university like Missouri like 7%, 5%, such a low percentage of African American students? Why does it take us to get to the point where the students have to shout down the professors for the universities to look at themselves and say, there's something wrong with this picture. It's not reflective of the community where this school is. And you remember that University of Missouri president, he's in his parade and he was so arrogant and he wouldn't even address those students. So
Did he end up stepping down?
Yeah, they forced him out, absolutely.
So interestingly, the Missouri and the Yale ones, which happened basically at the same time, I see as two, what to me at the Yale thing was far worse. The Missouri thing, had the mostly black football team not got involved, then nothing would have happened. So I do hear that. But even in that instance, there was that professor or part-time professor, that woman who came out and got caught on camera saying we need some muscle here. And then that is a free speech issue. So I guess that goes to your earlier point, which is you can be for a movement, and that doesn't mean you agree with every tactic.
Every tactic. Some of the tactics are not well thought out, but again, that's why I said they're 18, they're 19. This is some of their first experience with any kind of unrest or any kind of protest. So I wouldn't expect their thoughts to be as developed or their tactics to be as developed as, somebody is 30 or 40 or beyond. So I think we have to just accept that these are teenagers just kind of finding their way and young adults who are finding their way on some pretty complex issues. But I think more importantly for me is, if I'm a university president, why aren't I being more proactive on these issues? Why aren't I addressing issues of diversity and inclusion before it bubbles up and now I have the kind of protest that we've seen on campuses across this country? So I just don't think a lot of these folks are being very smart about the issue of diversity and inclusion, and we could segue into the Oscars.
Yeah.
A very good example of that.
Let me throw in one other thing, and then we'll go Oscars. Okay. But this is exactly why I wanted to talk about this, because I think that basically the bulk of the sane people in the middle of this country pretty much see these things in a similar way. But even just what we're doing right now, it shows that there are different ways of looking at it. It doesn't mean someone else is racist or someone else is automatically a bigot or something, and we're so used to using those words. So that's why I
agree with
that's why I wanted to unfurl some of it.
But sometimes, unfortunately, we can't sit down and
well,
have this kind of dialogue because those words that you use just shuts the conversation down.
Yeah, so one other piece on this, and then we'll move to the Oscars, is my guest last week, Michael Shermer, who's a thinker and a skeptic. He made an interesting point about the college thing where he said to me, you know, if these kids at Yale, if at this point what they're protesting about is Halloween costumes that might offend them, then that actually shows great progress in society because of the things that they would have had to protest 30 years ago. And I thought that actually gave me a little bit of, it was a nice feeling to sort of take away from this. That it doesn't mean that problems don't exist, but it means that we actually have moved forward in society, and we don't. I think sometimes we don't stop and acknowledge that enough.
And I think Obama did a great job of that when they had the march on the John Pettis Bridge at Selma. And he says, as much work as there is to do on this question of race in America, we cannot lose sight of the tremendous progress that has been made. So I would agree with Michael on that point that yes, they weren't protesting because they couldn't eat in the same cafeteria or drink from the same water fountain as the white students. Now the issues of race, and they've changed. They're more subtle. They're more, in some ways, insidious because they're not overt. So the colored only signs made it real clear what our mission was. You know, there wasn't much dispute about that. But now you're right, because even again, African Americans are often divided on this question. And I've sat on Drew's couch with some conservative African Americans who say, like Larry, what are they complaining about?
Yeah.
They're in the college, work hard, get good grades, and everything will work out. So that people aren't, speaking from one voice on this issue of race because it's complex.
Yeah, so I know I said last thing, but I'm going to throw in one more, just jumping on that. So what do you make in general of black conservatives? Because I'm friends with a few black conservatives. David Webb, who's a SiriusXM host, who is a Fox News contributor, is a good friend of mine. We work together at Sirius. And I know I know him extremely well. And we've had drinks together, we've had dinner together. I know that he believes what he's saying.
Yeah.
And when I see what people say about him online, Uncle Tom, and we could go through the list of things that people say. What do you make of people like that?
Well, first of all, I think David and any black Republican, conservative, however they identify themselves, they're perfectly within their right to have the opinions that they have about race and politics and to identify with the GOP party or the independent party or whatever party. So I don't come from a place that because you're black, you have to agree with everything that I believe in, or because you're gay or there's no monolithic thought in any of these communities. That people have different points of views, and I like a conversation where all of those points of views have an opportunity to present themselves and to be a part of the conversation. I don't think that because David or Larry or any of those conservatives have their view about the family, that view is any less significant than my view.
Yeah.
Because I don't see it the way they see it. Doesn't mean that their points aren't important. So I like debating those guys. I like talking to those guys. And I think it's a mistake to try to shut their speech down or to try to silence them.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
To silence who, some people call these lefties, these, super progressives.
Yeah, I'm not thrilled with those guys either, but that's
bring it on.
That's a whole other topic.